Hi, and welcome to a belt buckle tutorial from Imagine Landscapes Knits. We have got Gnutmeg, the gnome from the ADVENTure Gnome pattern here, and we've marked a stitch earlier in the gnome knitting, and this belt needs a buckle, or at least it does in my world. If you don't want to do this, obviously feel free to skip it. I'm all about that. So we need about an arm's length of our belt yarn on a yarn needle. And we need to remember which stitch this is. Have the hat towards you, and then these 4 stitches will be centered. See that we want to be centered on these decrease lines here. All right, so we've got the hat towards me. If you want to use a different yarn, this is a great chance. Or at the end of knitting this or embroidering it, if you want to outline it in some sparkly yarn, some silver or gold or something like that, that would be super fun as well. So what we need to do is we need to go down beside the column of stitches. So we're going to be talking a lot about columns here. So each stack of these is a column of stitches, and I want to go down beside the marked stitch, and I want to come up 4 stitches away, so that there are 4 stitches between where I went down and where I come up. Now I'm going to remove this because it's going to be in my way. Depending on what kind of stitch marker you have or how you work, you may want to keep yours. That's your call. So I've got my yarn, my needle under 4 V's. 1, 2, 3, 4. If this is a dark yarn and it's hard for you to see, you can look and see on your body yarn that you've got 4 stacks of V's there. Pull through, but don't pull all the way through because that would be silly. We want to leave enough yarn to be a tail for later. And then all we're going to do is we're going to whip around and around, wrapping these 4 columns in yarn. And you may find that some stuffing comes up with it, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but there's some little tiny fluffs. Don't worry about defluffing mid belt buckle. You're going to come and do that again. So go through, and each stitch will probably need 2 or 3 times. When you go down, don't go down deeply. What you don't want to do is be fighting all of the stuffing. Whereas if you kind of go down and then just skim behind, you won't be fighting the stuffing. You'll be going in that layer of in between the knitting and the stuffing. So we're just going to go like this, and we're going to lay that strand of yarn across. I'm going to do that again. Like I said, each row of stitches needs 2 to 3 of these little embroidered horizontals here. As you go, you can kind of straighten things up so that they're always looking nice, and that you're sort of adding vertically as we go. You can, of course, come down and afterwards and do sort of like a final layer, but tidiness now makes a big deal. Makes things easier as we go. Makes a big deal. It does not make sense. I mean, makes a big difference. There we go. Don't pull so much that you're opening a hole between this column and this column. Be careful as you go. Embroidery is simple. Do not be scared of it. And especially don't be scared of it with knitting, especially as we're doing it now, because undoing this is really easy. If you absolutely hated it, you could even just stick your needle or your scissors underneath. Make sure you don't have the knitting fabric and just chop, chop, chop and redo it. So don't fuss too much about getting this perfect. I've said this time and time again throughout this knit along and others. Whimsy is so appropriate for a gnome that if yours is a bit wobbly, a bit wonky, that only adds to the charm of your particular gnome and makes it that much more special and yours. I bet you can see the stuffing coming out now. Don't worry about it. Just feeling like I'm starting to get a little too tight there, so I'm just gonna kind of pull back and not tighten that one quite so much. All right, so I'm gonna do one more loop, and then we've got to figure out how to tidy this up and get rid of that end, right? That's one of the biggest stresses about making toys, is what do you do with the ends? Well, for the belt buckle, what I want you to do is I want you to, well, let's first just trim up some of this little bits of fluff and fuzz so that hopefully you can see better. All I want you to do is don't come down where you went up. Make sure it's a slightly different spot on the fabric of the knitting. And I want you to come down underneath and travel diagonally back to where you first started the whole thing. And then now is a moment to sort of stop, have a look. Do things look good? If things look good, we're just going to tie a knot. It's the nice thing about if you can do this with where you have two ends, ooh, things get so tidy so easily and so secure so easily. All right, we're going to tie those. I am going to trim my longer end so that they're the same length tails. I'm going to thread both of them on the yarn needle together. And then I'm going to plunge down and through, and I'm going to make sure that that knot comes through. You'll feel it pop. There you are. All I have to do now is pull tight, not too tight, snap, and it'll pop in. And now we have a belt buckle, and isn't that just so satisfying? Man, does that ever make me happy. I hope you are enjoying yourself, and I hope that you enjoy the next stage of Gnutmeg. Happy knitting and happy gnoming.